What's your name?
This morning, newly released footage showing Sonya Massey 16 hours before she was fatally shot on July 6th at her home outside Springfield, Illinois.
I don't know what to do.
In this new body cam video obtained by our ABC affiliate WICS, Massey is seen interacting with police, explaining she was worried about her children.
I don't know where they at. I think they hurt mommy.
No, they're at their dad's house. They're worried about you too. Everybody just wants you to be okay. That's all it is.
Over the course of the roughly 45-minute video, Massey is sitting in her car, upset over her family, as well as the lights and water being turned off at her home.
When I got home, I ain't got no hot water, I ain't got no lights. I had to throw away all the food.
You calling today to get that fixed, you said?
They got my phone.
At one point, she confirmed she'd been taking her medicine when asked about it by officers.
When's the last time you took your medicine?
It's written down last night.
On July 5th, Massey's mother, Donna, called 911, saying Sonya was having a mental health episode, her mother pleading with the operator not to hurt her daughter.
She's been mentally having a mental breakdown. She thinks everybody's after her.
Hours later, at 12:49 a.m. on July 6th, Sonya called 911 herself to report a disturbance.
It sounds like somebody was banging on the side of my house. I don't know. Could y'all come and see?
30-year-old Sean Grayson and his partner responded to the call, the situation quickly escalating when Sonya asked to take a boiling pot of water off the stove.
Where you going?
Away from your hot steaming water.
Away from my hot steaming water?
Yeah.
Oh, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus.
I
rebuke you in the name of Jesus.
better not. I swear to God, I'll shoot you right in your face.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Drop the pot. Drop the pot.
You ready to deep dive into some heavy stuff today? Police accountability when mental health's involved?
Absolutely. It's a tough one, but a conversation we got to have.
Yeah, in this case we're looking at today, Sonya Massey and former Deputy Sean Grayson in Illinois. It's not just a local story anymore.
No, it's national news now. Even the Justice Department's got an eye on this one.
And there's a turn in the legal proceedings too. A real head scratcher, honestly. So Sonya Massey, she's a 36-year-old black woman, calls 911. Is there someone lurking around her home?
I mean, that's what we're told to do, right? Call for help when we feel unsafe. You know, that's the expectation.
Exactly. And Deputy Grayson, he responds to the call, and at first, everything seems like a pretty normal interaction.
Yeah, kind of routine, right? Like, they even chat about a pot of water Sonya had on the stove. Just a regular call.
Yeah, just trying to confirm everything's okay. But then, it all goes sideways. And it ends tragically.
It's those details of the encounter, though, that are so important, right? It wasn't a hostage situation, no weapon in sight, just a conversation that went from 0 to 100 and ended with a fatal shooting.
And it's chilling. Right before Grayson fires his weapon, Sonya says, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." Makes you think, what was going on in her mind.
Yeah, like, did Grayson pick up on anything at all that would have indicated she was in distress? I mean, was he even trained to spot those signs? These are the questions we have to ask if we really want to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Right, so with everything that happened, Grayson is charged with first-degree murder. The judge initially orders him detained, even calling Grayson's actions a departure from the expectations of civil society.
Strong words, right. It really seemed like the court was acknowledging how serious this all was, that Grayson could be a danger if they let him walk free.
Yeah. But here's where things get a little weird. An appellate court overturns that decision. They basically said that the prosecutors didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Grayson was a risk to the community if certain conditions were met. So wait, he's charged with first-degree murder, but they're saying he's not necessarily a danger. I'm confused.
It is confusing, right. But the appellate court, they weren't really specific. They were only focused on if Grayson was an immediate threat right now, before the trial, not about the actual charges against him. It's a pretty fine legal point.
Okay, I see. But what sort of conditions are we even talking about? Like, what would need to happen for him to be released?
Well, think of it like a safety net, to try and minimize any potential risk. So the court could require things like getting rid of any firearms, putting him on electronic monitoring, mandatory mental health evaluations, maybe even restricting his movement.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But still, it's hard to wrap my head around it, A former deputy charged with first-degree murder, a judge who initially calls him a danger to society, and then an appellate court saying, well, maybe he's not that dangerous if we keep him on a short leash. It just feels like a really mixed message about holding people accountable.
And that's exactly why this case has become a lightning rod in this whole debate about police accountability, especially when we're talking about mental health. Does our system even have the tools to deal with this kind of thing? Are we asking the right questions?
So many questions. Does this whole thing point to the need for like a complete revamp of how we train police to respond to mental health calls?
That's exactly what we need to be talking about. And how could things have gone differently in this specific case?
In this case, I mean, it feels like the tip of the iceberg, right? Tragically, we've seen this play out before,
Yeah.
often with people of color. It makes you question if we're doing enough to protect those who are most vulnerable.
That's a crucial point. This case can't be viewed in isolation, you know? It's part of a bigger pattern that has really hurt the public's trust in law enforcement. And that damage is even worse in communities of color where there's already a ton of tension.
So if you were in charge, if someone said, hey, we need you to fix police training, especially when dealing with mental health, where would you even start? What needs to change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to really answer it, we need to go even deeper into this world of police training and mental health crisis response. We got to go beyond just adding a few extra training sessions. This needs to be a total overhaul. Like, imagine mandatory hardcore crisis intervention training for every single officer on the force.
Okay, so we're not just talking about like a quick seminar or watching a slideshow. This has got to be something serious.
No way. We're talking a deep, deep dive into understanding mental health crises, how to spot the signs, how to de-escalate things safely. And it can't just be theoretical, it's got to be real world. Think simulations, role-playing, ongoing testing. You got to make sure these officers can handle the pressure when things get real.
Yeah, it's one thing to know the textbook answer. It's another thing entirely to be able to use it in a split-second decision.
Right. And we need a change in philosophy, too. We got to move away from that old command and control way of thinking, you know, the one that just makes things worse. It's got to be about de-escalation, about empathy, about communication.
That's a huge change, though. It's like, instead of seeing someone as a threat right away, officers are trained to see a person, you know, someone who might be struggling.
Exactly. They need to get it. Someone in a mental health crisis, they might not react to orders the way you'd expect. So you got to adjust, use calming techniques, actually listen, try to understand what that person's dealing with.
It sounds like we're talking about a totally different way for police to interact with people. A total 180.
It is a big shift, and it can't just be about individual officers either. This has to be woven into the entire culture of law enforcement. There needs to be real accountability, a system that makes these skills a priority and holds officers responsible when they screw up.
Accountability, yeah. That's such a big part of this whole thing. We talked about the charges against Grayson, how he was initially held, then released before trial. It's just murky, you know? And I think a lot of people are left wondering, what does true accountability actually look like?
It's tough. There's no easy answer. The legal system, it's got its own ways of doing things. And as we saw with Grayson, there can be different interpretations of the law about what constitutes a threat. But accountability goes beyond the courtroom too. We need transparency, community oversight, and for law enforcement to be willing to admit when they've messed up and learn from it.
So it's like building a system that's focused on making sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again, instead of just reacting after the fact.
Exactly. A system where it's about getting better all the time, where mistakes aren't just swept under the rug, they're used to improve. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about people's lives here.
Circling back to Sonya's case, what are the big takeaways for you? When mental health becomes part of the equation, how does that change how we look at police accountability? What do we need to understand?
This case highlights a few things, big things. First, the desperate need for better training when it comes to mental health. We got to give officers the tools they need to de-escalate these sensitive situations, to put safety first, everyone's safety.
And it's not just about adding training hours, right? It's got to be a deeper change, like a change of heart, even within law enforcement, to really value these skills and be serious about holding people accountable.
Absolutely. Second, this case shows us just how complicated the legal system is when it comes to holding officers accountable. You know, that back and forth of Grayson being detained, then released, that's confusing for the public, and it raises some tough questions about what justice actually looks like.
Yeah, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, like you said.
And finally, we can't ignore the massive impact these tragedies have, especially on communities of color. These communities, they often already have a strained relationship with law enforcement.
Right. It makes it that much harder to trust, that much easier to feel afraid, even when calling for help.
That feeling that you're vulnerable, that calling for help could make things worse, that's a serious problem, a deep wound. And it needs to be acknowledged. It needs real systemic change.
So much of this feels so much bigger than any one person or any one solution.
And you're spot on. We've got to recognize these systemic issues and then figure out how to tackle them at the root. We have to build a system where everyone feels safe, protected, no matter what their mental state is, no matter who they are, when they interact with the police.
That's a big goal, but it's a good one. So what now? What can people do? How can they help move things in the right direction?
I think the first step is to just keep talking about this stuff. Keep asking those difficult questions about police training, about accountability, about the role law enforcement plays in our communities.
Stay informed, stay engaged, and push for real, meaningful change. And as we wrap up this deep dive, is there a question, a thought, anything you want to leave our listeners with? Something that will make them think about all of this even after the episode's over?
We've talked a lot about training, right? But let's push that a little further. Imagine, like, you're building specialized mental health response units within the police force. So beyond the training itself, what else matters? What kind of person is going to do well in those situations? You know, where empathy, really understanding someone is super important.
That's a good point. It really makes you think about, like, the human side of all this. What makes someone truly good at handling these sensitive situations? It can't just be about, like, passing a test, right?
Definitely not. You're talking about people who are like naturally compassionate, patient, and really want to help people. So how you choose those officers, it can't just be about their resume or what courses they've taken.
So are we talking about, like, psych evaluations, personality tests, maybe even talking to the community, seeing how well an officer connects with people?
Yeah, exactly. You want people who get it, who get mental health, who approach these situations with, like, real care. People who are committed to de-escalation, you know, not making things worse.
Because at the end of the day, this is about saving lives. It's about making sure what happened to Sonya Massey never happens again.
That's it. The goal is that everyone feels safe, protected when they interact with law enforcement, no matter what their mental state is or their background.
A system we can all trust. It's a big goal, but it's worth it. This has been a heavy one, but it's been a good conversation. We've covered a lot of ground today. The tragedy of Sonya Massey's death, the complexities of the legal case against Deputy Grayson, and, well, this whole huge debate about police accountability and training. It all points to the need for serious change. And it needs to happen soon.
It's a conversation we can't let die down. We need to keep asking the tough questions, keep holding people accountable, and keep pushing for real change at every level.
So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all this? What's the thought that will stick with them?
Sonya's story. Don't forget it. Let it fuel your curiosity, your empathy, and your commitment to building a more just and compassionate world. We can do better. We have to do better.
Thank you for being here with us today as we dove into this critical issue. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for positive change.